Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. He is the contributor to the Daily Norseman, amongst many other blogs, and is slowly but surely losing his mind. Please welcome Arif Hassan. Arif, how you doing?
I'm good, despite the obvious decay that my mind is going through.
Slowly but surely. The fact that we didn't have a Vikings game this weekend, I imagine, I don't know if you actually caught any additional sleep or if you just slowly just sucked the rest of your matter inside and just tried to survive.
Yeah, no, I didn't actually know what to do with myself after the Sunday night game was done. So I just stressed out about my lineups, and then I did actually go to sleep. And then I was able to do my first workout in a while since coming back from California. So we're going to start that up.
Well, we did not have a second show last week. Sorry for that. But there really wasn't anything worth reporting on, especially after we had already talked about the Hodges trade and ended up going in depth on the daily fantasy. On the daily fantasy interview. So there wasn't much to discuss, and those of you who have listened to our preseason shows and off-season shows, hit or miss, I think, is the best word to describe some of those. So we figured we weren't going to toss out anything subpar and or anything like that. So what we decided to do is just 86 the Thursday show and instead come back strong this week, which we have. So we have all sorts of things to talk about. We're going to be going over the division this week. Just in case you've missed games or would like to know a little more about how the other teams in our division are doing, we'll be going over in detail the three other teams and some of the Vikings as well. And we'll also be doing a little bit of predictions as to what's coming up for the Vikings coming to the half season mark. So we have all sorts of great things to talk about, and the first thing I want to mention is about our sponsors, which we have none. Our sponsors are our listeners. Our listeners are some of the best listeners in the world. Yay, listeners! We are donation-based. We are not ad-based. You will not sit here and listen to me shill for Stamps.com. You will not listen to Arif lie about how he uses Dollar Shave Club.
Wait, but I do.
Do you really use it you use it on your head?
On my head, yeah.
Okay, you use it on your head. You're not actually using it to trim the beast of the beard. Okay. I get that. Well, regardless, you're not going to hear us shill for it. And you're not going to hear us talk about how you can create a new website with Squarespace. We don't need you to create any sort of accounts and use any sort of entry codes or 1,000 codes from FanDuel or something like that. We are just here as a result of you guys' patronage. We appreciate our listeners, and we appreciate the people who will donate to our cause and to keep the lights on, as it were, and try to keep us going. So we did get two nice donations this week. One of which from the UK. A fellow by the name of Kevin gave us $10 to, quote, keep the lights on. Thank you, Kevin, so much for that. I was actually looking over the Libsyn, which is our host. I was looking over the top 5 countries that listen to Norse Code, and a couple of them will surprise you, actually. Obviously, number 1 is the United States, but then we have France, for some reason.
Okay,
I had no idea.
Sure.
France, United Kingdom. Sort of get that one since the Vikings played, was it 2 games in a or 2 years in a row in the UK?
Yeah, it's still a little like, maybe it's just I don't know. It's so much as that out of all of the non-North American countries, the UK clearly has the largest NFL fan base.
Yeah. So United Kingdom, then Canada, and then Sweden. Like, really? That's. I would have expected Canada to be a little bit higher, especially since 100% cheese-free is from Canada. I think maybe there was a little more draw with... I'm not saying that the cheese-free is the draw. I'm saying maybe he's what actually shows that we have more Canadian people listening to it. But no, it's Canada's 4th.
Yeah, that's surprising. I think Canada should step its game up. But also, I need
Yeah,
to know why we
Canada.
don't appeal to Canadian listeners. You basically almost have a Canadian accent, so
Exactly. I'm the
I don't
one
really
who's
know what's
closest.
happening.
I'm the one closest to the border. I mean, I'm about an hour or so from the border, maybe hour and a half, and yeah, what the hell. It's funny because we've actually had a lot of support from Canada. A fair amount of the donors who have who've pitched in to help keep the show going are from Canada, and I don't know if it has to do with the fact that my child is 25% Canadian, pure Canadian. Like I'm fairly,
25%
he is
Canadian.
25% Canadian.
Does
His
that mean he gets a discount on healthcare?
actually, I don't think it's a discount on healthcare, but he has been able to make maple syrup already, and he's only like 3. So
That's impressive.
he's making it at a 4th grade level. The dude, he's not at the flappy head thing for South Park yet, but I worry some days, as a father does. But I don't know if it has anything to do with that. And it's the good part of Canada too, not the French part, like not the part that the Canadians hate. It's the good part. It's the Calgary area. It's perfect. It's great. But special thanks to Canada for the support you have shown the show over the last 3 years. We were looking over some of the donations, and there's a disproportionate amount of Canadian donations. So thank you, Canada, for helping out with the show. So we don't have a game to recap, but we have a division to talk about. And the first thing that I want to bring up when we're going over the division, let's just start with Detroit. Let's start with the bottom and move up from there. Detroit. The Lions Twitter account today made sure to note that Jim Caldwell, their coach, I want to say embattled coach. Can I say embattled coach? I feel like that's appropriate.
I just feel like that implies a level of contention that Jim Caldwell can rise to that isn't necessarily the case.
Yeah, that might actually involve an emotion, and I'm fairly certain that Caldwell does not do well with emotions. But their Twitter account put out a tweet saying that Jim Caldwell has the full support of the locker room. Now, I don't know which one is worse. The PR, the press conference where the general manager and like the owner of the team come out and say, Jim Caldwell has our full support moving forward. We have no plans to replace him or anything like that. He has our full support going forward. Like they have that just to do that, or the Twitter account because the owner and GM are too lazy to go out and have a press conference to say that the locker room has the full support. Which one is worse?
I think it's having the Twitter account tweet it out because it's so much more than just an acknowledged problem. Like it's just like, yeah, no. I just want to assure you that the pork was fully cooked tonight. Like, how does that not make you nervous? Like if you're at a restaurant and the maitre d' like, is like, and you made a good choice coming here. The pork is definitely fully cooked tonight. Like you're leaving, right?
Of course. Like, well, I'll have you know that our fire department has only started 3 fires this year. What? Like this? What? We're leaving this town right now. So yeah, Detroit's a garbage fire. Has 0 wins, 5 losses. Let's take a look at some of the losses, though. Part of what we're going to be doing is determining whether or not the team is actually good and what they can look forward to coming up. And the Detroit Lions have had a real rough spot of it. They have lost to the Chargers, obviously the Vikings, the Broncos, the Seahawks, and the Cardinals. So taking a look at that, 2 of the better teams of the league, Broncos and Cardinals, Seahawks, not great, but their defense is really good. And obviously the Vikings, we kicked them around pretty good. And the Chargers on week 1. That's still not great. You want to win at least against the Chargers, right?
Yeah, and honestly, I mean the Chargers aren't like a bad team or anything like that. And I think that Detroit I think it's just the Detroit should have expected to do better. I mean, that's a pretty difficult schedule. I mean, obviously Broncos, Seahawks, Cardinals. But I think that when you take a look at it holistically, like if you look at it game by game, you can see like, well, Detroit's probably expected to lose, each one of these games. But holistically, you should have had your expected value for all of these games should include one win, right? Like so you've got maybe a 45% chance of beating the Chargers, a 40% chance of beating the Vikings, a 20% chance of beating the Broncos, a 15% chance of beating the Seahawks, and a 10% chance of beating the Cardinals. That all adds up to more than one, right? So I think that when you take a look at the individual losses, like well, the competition thing, that's not as much of an issue. But you should also, also beyond that, if you just look at how they played in some of these games, like this Cardinals game that they played, they were up at the half, I think 7-0, where they were up early in the game, and they didn't play like they were up. And I don't mean like they didn't play like, run the ball, reduce possessions, take advantage of the lead you have by, or by compressing the game and giving them as few chances as possible. Not that, but more they kind of looked defeated and they played defeated despite the fact that they were winning. And, that's not kind of the analysis that we tend to subscribe to a lot because you can tend to, overanalyze like body language and things like that. And it's not really easy to confirm.
They played like Jim Caldwell looks. Just
that's exactly
the look on his face is how they played.
Yeah, they played exactly like that. And they played like, bad Matt Stafford, depressed after like an interception. And it was just awful. And then, of course, Stafford does the thing where he throws the 3 interceptions and he gets benched. And that's just weird because it's not – I don't think it is really like a pitcher because that was Caldwell's, analogy. Like, oh, well, it's not that we benched him because we thought, that generally speaking that Orlovsky's a better quarterback. It's just, pitchers have bad games. And so, you take them out early and you put in another pitcher and you go kind of deeper into the rotation. No, it's clearly not that.
Has he been moonlighting as a women's softball coach for like a beer league somewhere? Like,
would make so much sense.
Is that what he's doing? And if so, is he showing emotion there? Like, maybe he's showing so much emotion as a beer league coach that he has nothing left for Sunday. Like, if that's the case, I totally
that would be amazing. I would want to watch those games. Those softball beer league games where he's showing emotion. Oh my gosh.
Why couldn't we have the Detroit Lions Hard Knocks where we show the beer league game that that Jim Caldwell is getting very upset and I want to see him like kicking the dust at the ump and like and getting ejected because he's so animated and so frustrated with life.
He throws the bag. Oh yeah, that would be amazing.
Just he throws out the Gatorade out of the dugout too. Just what the hell? And then just loses it, and then goes back out and comes on Sunday morning and just we took him out. Some pitchers have good days and some pitchers have bad, and we replaced him because he was having a bad day. Like no, that's exactly what's happening. He's doing something in his life where he is draining all of the emotion and all of the humanity out of himself. He might be a serial killer. Let's not like...
Oh, that would make so much sense.
I mean, he did leave, it was Indy, right? He left Indy and then... He never went to Buffalo, but he left Indy in a hurry.
Right. No, he did leave Indy pretty quickly. I don't know if it was because of the heat from the cops. But can't rule that out.
Let us be clear. We're not saying that he is a serial killer. I'm just saying...
we don't know that he isn't.
We don't know for certain that he isn't. He is not confirmed that he is not a serial killer. How about that? That's journalism,
it's true.
Right? Yeah.
It's true. He is not lay quiet the questions about his serial killing activities.
Yeah, we don't know what he did in 1990. Let's be clear. We have no idea what he has confirmed and not or denied. But in any case, the Jim Caldwell era is running into all sorts of problems in Detroit, and leading some to be pining for the days of Jim Schwartz.
Yeah, and they honestly should be because Schwartz obviously, like, despite the fact that he's a very good defensive coordinator, we're seeing that he's very clearly not the kind of coach that evidently can put together a good defense despite having talent there. Detroit's defensive coordinator is pretty good. Obviously, less good without Ndamukong Suh, but still pretty good. But the offensive coordinator, Joe Lombardi, is awful. I think Stafford's regressed under Joe Lombardi, and he's supposed to be like this quarterback guru. And Stafford's having issues reading defenses, anticipating blitzes, finding the open person, which is just incredible. I mean, like he was much better at that under Schwartz and under the previous regime
And let's be
than he is
clear,
now.
this is his 7th year in the league. This is not somebody who's 2 or 3 years in and is given a little bit of grace, like has a little bit of a grace period. Dude is in his 7th year.
Yeah, no, he's definitely not playing like this is his 7th year in the league, which is like kind of nuts because like he's also hitting, he's almost near the prime age to be a quarterback, which is 28, 29, 30. He's 27, which, wow, he entered the league when he was 20. I think every year people just remark on how young he is, and we're finally at the point where we no longer have to remark that, wow, he's still pretty young, because it doesn't mean anything anymore because he's been in the league for 7 years. He hasn't improved. He's gotten worse. And he's far removed from the 40 touchdown season that he was at.
Yeah, we've seen his ceiling.
Yeah, and it's honestly pretty. It's definitely good enough to get in the playoffs. I mean, it was enough to get in the playoffs when he wasn't even at his ceiling. But it's definitely good enough to get in the playoffs, win a game or two in the playoffs, and make things interesting. So long as the defense is sort of keeping up, and that's not really happening. The defense is bad, even though we expected it to be good because that's sort of what their identity was last year. The offense is bad despite having Calvin Johnson and, in fact, a pretty good stable of running backs. I mean, both Zach Zenner and Amir Abdullah are probably better than average running backs in the NFL right now. They've got both of them. They're not really doing much with them. Golden Tate, a very good receiver who's being kind of stifled in this offense. I think the biggest problem is Joe Lombardi as an offensive coordinator, which is related to Jim Caldwell, also a huge problem. Stafford, I mean, you're going to get you get what you get. You get like a less risky Jay Cutler, which means fewer big plays, but at least generally speaking, fewer boneheaded plays. But he should be better in his 7th year, and he's not. His offensive coordinator should be better, and it's not. And that's why they're 0-5, and their defense is obviously suffering from problems too. Their offensive line suffering from some problems too. But those are ancillary problems to the Stafford Lombardi problem.
Yeah, it's clear that the problem is right at the top of the coaching, and it just trickles down to the players, and the players are looking very frustrated and don't feel like they have any sort of a shot. They're not trading away all their assets like our next area, but still, it's worth noting that the team is 0-5, and they do not look like that's going to change anytime soon. Like, they certainly don't look like they have any sort of drive.
Yeah, something is going to have to change schematically, and something is going to have to change in terms of the way the team plays, like non-schematically, in order for them to pick up, a win in their next 3 games, next 4 weeks, which is going to be kind of difficult, even though they've got, some relatively easy-ish opponents. Their next 4 games, or the next 4 weeks, are the Bears, the Vikings, and then they're going to be at the Chiefs, and then they're going to have the bye. And the Chiefs are not looking as good as many people would have anticipated. Their defense isn't nearly as good as it should be, despite that assemblage of talent. And maybe it gets back up to that level by the time the Lions play them. That might be their best opportunity because the Bears, I mean, they're coming off of 2 back-to-back wins, which is kind of weird. But if there's an offense, if there's a defense that Jay Cutler can take advantage of, it might be this Detroit defense. Despite all of the weirdness that comes with having Jay Cutler as a quarterback. So the Lions will probably want to, or they'll probably should anticipate a win playing the Bears at home, but it would make a little bit of weird, convoluted sense if they don't. They should anticipate a loss to the Vikings at home unless the Vikings kind of crap out because they're kind of an inconsistent team. And they should expect to be competitive against the Chiefs, but I think that with all of those things, you shouldn't be surprised if they go 1-3, and I think that their expectation is to go maybe 1-2.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And we can answer the question of are they good with an emphatic no.
No.
Absolutely not. So, we get to move on to Chicago. Chicago. Stuff with them right now. They have Smokin' Jay Cutler back. They have him back after their fire sale, where they got rid of Jared Allen and who else did they get rid of?
They got rid of a bunch. I don't even remember anymore.
Yeah.
Like they got rid of a linebacker, maybe that's not Allen.
Yeah.
Just a lot of people.
Yeah. A lot of people just left the team. They found they found other places to play, and Jared Allen is doing fairly well in Carolina, but yeah. So they've had their fire sale. They are beginning to rebound, as Arif said, with two quick wins. Their wins include the Raiders and the Chiefs, which were both very close games. The losses are to the Packers, the Cardinals, and the Seahawks. Now, here's where we get to we start to talk about whether or not the team is good or not. Like, those are three pretty good losses. Like, the Packers, okay, the game wasn't as close as the score may have shown for week one, but the Cardinals are an excellent team as well, and the Seahawks are not exactly the worst team in the league. That's a pretty good run of teams for them to go through, and then to just quick bounce back with two wins.
Yeah, no, it'd be difficult if you said, hey, you're 2-3, and you got to choose who your three losses are. You'd be hard pressed to choose maybe three different teams because you're right; those are very good teams. The Seahawks aren't performing as well as maybe people expected, but there's no question. I think that they're a good team, and the Packers and the Cardinals are undefeated. The Cardinals, I think, have the biggest margin of victory by a substantial amount. So yeah, no, it's pretty crazy having those teams on your schedule. So it makes sense that they lost to them. I think a lot of people expected the Bears to be in contention for the first overall pick. Their wins against the Raiders and the Chiefs, it kind of depends on what you think of the Chiefs. I think that, they should be better than they are, but, honestly, they're just not good right now. But they probably should have lost that game to the Chiefs, in terms of like who would sort of play better over the course of the game. That Raiders game was really weird. I didn't anticipate that. I think a lot of people even picked the Raiders in their suicide league. So if you did, I'm sorry. But, that was also a close game against a team that I think it's got some exciting talent. I mean, you could call, Charles Woodson kind of exciting, but you definitely have Khalil Mack. I think Justin Tuck's playing better this year than he did last year. Obviously, you have Derek Carr, you've got Amari Cooper. I think Michael Crabtree is doing really well for them in that system, which is the Musgrave system. And I think that they're hiding or papering over some offensive line problems really, really well. I think Latavius Murray is good. So they've got talent, but they don't have it in a lot of places. And so I think that Oakland is a team that bad teams should strive to beat, and they beat them. But I think that doesn't mean that they're not, a bad team. I think that just means, with the bottom on the line, the Bears made sure not to secure the number one overall draft pick, at least thus far.
Yeah.
So the Chiefs, that's a better team, like I said. Also a close game. If Jamal Charles doesn't get injured, right? Because that was last week, right?
Right.
If Jamal Charles doesn't get injured, I think they lose, right? So, yeah, I think the Bears are happy about their back-to-back wins. You can't say anything else, but I think that they're not necessarily much more than a 2-win team, but they're better than a 3-loss team, So they're not the worst, I think, is what I would say, but I would not call them good.
They're clearly not the worst in the division anyway. And looking at looking at it right now, the other question you can ask yourself is, are they adjusting to John Fox still? John Fox is the new coach, and sometimes schemes take a few more weeks to click than others. And is it something that they may have just sort of adjusted or finally believed in John Fox?
No, that's a good question, and I think that what's interesting is that at defensive coordinator they have Vic Fangio, who's a very, very good defensive coordinator, and I think the issue is just a talent deficit. I think that you've got some interesting coaching. I think Denver fans are probably not huge fans of John Fox, and I understand that. But you've got some interesting coaching and some coaches that could probably get some stuff done for you. But I think there's just a talent deficit. Matt Forte is always going to be good. Jay Cutler is who he is, so he's really good some games. He's really bad some other games. He's got some amazing throws, and he's got some boneheaded decisions. Alshon Jeffrey, when he's going to be healthy again, that'll be a huge asset to that offense. It's going to make them a little bit better. I think it's less about adjusting to John Fox and Fangio, but more about, having those moments of inconsistent brilliance shine through and help them, and overcoming some of that talent deficit. Because I think at the end, it's less about adjusting to the scheme and more about how they just don't have as much talent all around as they need. And so I think that some of their successes are probably unsustainable because of that. And I think you're probably going to see a string of failure sometime in the near future. It could be at the Lions, it could be against the Vikings, or it could be against the Chargers. So, but I think that they are likely to lose 2 of their 3 next games. They also have a bye in their next 4 weeks. And I wouldn't be surprised if they lost all 3, but 2 of those are I think that if you look at it probabilistically, I think 2 of those are good chances of losses. And one of those is, you could potentially pull out another win, but I don't think it means much for the team overall.
Yeah, and looking at the team too. I mean, you had mentioned Alshon Jeffrey. Jeffrey being as hurt as he has been, and you take Cutler out of the equation, and ignoring the fact that Cutler can occasionally be a interception machine, and I think that's putting it mildly. It's still he's still the gunslinger for the team, and he's still the number 1 quarterback. So taking him out for any period of time is detrimental to the team. They're just not going to be playing as well. So a couple of these games could end up, or a couple of these losses could end up getting put on the fact that Cutler was not able to suit up because of his injury. But the question of are they good? Probably not. But I feel like they're going to need a few more games to properly answer that question. Moving
I think so, and I think
into half and 3/4 mark.
Yeah, for sure, and I think that's optimistic. I think that's a good sign for them, given where we thought they were going to be at the beginning of the season and after the first game. That hey, maybe they're not terrible. Maybe let's get a couple other games in there. See, we'll find out if this 2-3 team is terrible or not. Because the 2-3 record doesn't tell us the whole story. Like you said, Jimmy Clausen was playing. That's not really a good sign for anybody. And Cutler, he has good play in him, and occasionally it'll emerge, and sometimes it'll emerge for periods of time. And if it emerges for periods of time, then the Bears can be good.
If he can string together enough moments, he cannot be terrible. That is the story. In fact, I feel like that should be the title of Cutler's autobiography: stringing together moments of non-crap.
That's like an appropriately apathetic enough title that I think that he would be behind it.
Now the question is, would the picture of him on the cover actually include the cigarettes, or would the book come with like a coupon for like 25 cents off a pack of Marlboros or Virginia Slims or whatever it is that he smokes?
Actually, I think the book should come with like cigarette stickers that, through the book, because there's going to be a lot of pictures of Jay Cutler in it, that you could choose to put a particular sticker for whatever situation you thought was appropriate.
That's what the guy who did the Smokin' Jay Cutler blog should have done. He should have made a coffee table book with stickers. And you can make your own Cutler meme with these packs of smokes that are not necessarily branded, but you can just put them on all of these pictures that we've taken of Cutler at games, and you can just move from there. This is just a license to print money. I feel like saying this on the podcast is a bad idea because somebody might take it from us, but I feel like we should look at this for our next fundraiser.
That's not a terrible idea, although you do need to remember that in order to print pictures of NFL players in NFL uniforms and stuff, and then sell the book that has all those printed pictures, that requires 8 different loopholes, or not loopholes, but 8 different hoops you have to leap through. That was the phrase I was looking for, because I was looking into this based off of the training camp pictures that I was able to grab, and it's weird how much stuff you have to go through, and it's really expensive. So it's probably worth it. It's probably worth the $100,000 licensing fee or whatever it is, because I bet you can make a lot of money. But just keep that in mind.
So we would just have to make sure that we'd have at least $100,000 worth of sales in order to maybe this isn't the best idea.
Certainly possible.
Well, what if we could just hire a guy to hang outside of his house for a week and take pictures, right? Paparazzi don't cost that much.
No, they definitely don't cost that much. That's a great idea. Yeah, we should do it.
Let's just hire a guy to do that. It'll be fine. We have some listener in Chicago, I'm sure. It'll be good. It'll be fine. So, next team to talk about are the Green Bay Packers, who are currently dominating and are undefeated in football right now. And Rodgers is looking like a potential MVP candidate. And the wins haven't been against scrubs necessarily. Beat the Seahawks, beat the Bears, beat the Chiefs, beat the Rams, and the 49ers. Although that Rams game this last week was that was Nick Foles and a whole bunch of people who don't know how the hell to catch the ball.
Yeah, that was pretty dicey. They basically just had defense and Todd Gurley going for them. It's interesting. I think that's 2 games that Rodgers has looked kind of off. If I remember, I think maybe he didn't. It was either the 49ers or the Chiefs that he didn't play well against, and then the defense kind of bailed him out a little bit. So you're in a situation where even if you do take care of Aaron Rodgers, like the Rams did, to some extraordinary effect, 3 turnovers, 2 interceptions, 1 fumble, you still there are moments where like the defense, the Green Bay defense, can rise to the occasion and do a lot. They haven't really been tested against a good offense yet. I think that's not controversial. So we don't know how good the defense is, but it is kind of annoying / scary to know that when you shut down Rodgers or when you have a way to make sure to minimize the passing game, you can't just have a good running attack. You can't just have one good thing on offense, going for you. You need to be able to attack a defense in multiple ways. You need to overcome a defense that at times can definitely rise to the occasion, whether it's like, Clay Matthews blitzing or Sam Shields being good again, or Quentin Rollins or Demarius Randall, flashing. One of those things could happen, and then you're kind of in a bind, and you have to make sure that you can execute on offense, because minimizing the passing game, that doesn't mean not giving up points. And so, it's upsetting to see a Green Bay Packers team that kind of like the 2010 team is complete. Like the 2011 team wasn't complete, even though it went 15-1. But I think the 2010 team was frustrating in its own way, because it was a bit better on defense and the offense was still effective. And I think we're kind of in that same area where you have to deal with a team that has a decent enough defense that when you shut down Rodgers, they still have a pretty good shot.
Here's my question, and this becomes relevant because of the fact that his streak was finally broken. Thank God, we don't have to hear about that damn thing any longer. But is the only way to pick off Aaron Rodgers to tip the ball at the line? Like I'm starting to get the feeling that that's the only way to get any sort of leeway with it.
Well, it's weird because he doesn't take risks when he should too, which is probably the biggest criticism of him. Which, in the whole scheme of things, he's the best quarterback in the NFL right now, so it's not like that's a huge criticism. But he doesn't take risks when he needs to, which is why his comeback record is so, spotty compared to Peyton Manning or Tony Romo or Andy Dalton or Tom Brady. Andy Dalton, really? Aaron Rodgers, really? But like, when he doesn't take those risks, he doesn't throw those interceptions, of course, which is why in comeback situations he doesn't throw interceptions, but he also doesn't win the game either. So, some of it is just, how he's wired to play. He just is very aggressive about taking safe options, except, when penalties give him the option to take those risks. And safe options don't mean checkdowns. He's obviously not a checkdown quarterback. He attacks everywhere on the field, and he knows where his receivers win and how they can win and how to enable them. And he knows, the perfect sort of ball placement for them. But, he definitely, knows that he has the option. In previous years, that was because of the talent of his receiving core. This year, maybe that's less true, which is why he's throwing these interceptions. But he definitely has the option to pull back on a moderate risk to go for a safer throw. And so that's why it's, one of the reasons it's so difficult to intercept him. But, another one is just, I think the way that they run routes and the way that Rodgers throws to the outside, that's just a ball placement issue, which doesn't necessarily mean, in the Packers case it does mean, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the offense is doing what it needs to in order to move the chains. But it does mean you might need a longer player like Xavier Rhodes or a more physical player like Cam Chancellor, or something happening at the line of scrimmage, like with the St. Louis Rams and Robert Quinn, in order to generate those like turnover opportunities.
Is it something that the Vikings can kind of adjust to when it comes to their game near Thanksgiving? Just ended up kind of throwing as many people at the line as possible just to get your hands up to try to deflect something.
Well, that's tough because I think that under pressure, Aaron Rodgers is pretty good, but under the blitz, he's one of the best. Which those are two distinct things because blitzes don't cause pressures, and not all pressures are blitzes. But in situations where you take coverage defenders out in order to attack the quarterback, he's very good at identifying those. And so setting more in order to clog those passing lanes is smart, but it can put you in a bad situation depending on who you're sending, and if when you send them you clog the right passing lane in order to prevent him be able to take advantage right away of the spot and coverage that opens up. It'll have to do that's a kind of question you have to answer when you take a look at the range of the players who are playing. If Trey Waynes is playing, for example, then I think you've got a better range to work with than with Terrence Newman, depending on the kinds of blitzes. If it's a kind of blitz where you've got someone coming off of the edge, like a safety like Harrison Smith, then the area that's going to be uncovered is probably going to be pretty deep, and so Trey Waynes is going to help you a lot. If it's going to be somewhere interior or on the inside, then maybe you want to have Terrence Newman in instead. Because that's the area that Rodgers is going to attack if Harrison's or if like Anthony Barr blitzes or something. So you have to have an answer to what the quarterback's answer to that blitz is, because he's very, very good at that. And so it's going to be difficult to generate those turnovers based off of blitzes.
The only thing I have to say on the streak is that it's too bad that we did not get a chance to do it ourselves. I really wanted Harrison Smith to have the last one and then the one right after that. Like when I saw the interception, like, oh, come on. Oh, I really wanted the hitman to get that. I really wanted Harrison Smith to run that back, 30, 40 yards against Aaron Rodgers. That would have been a nice bookend, like, because you could see in your head how the highlight on that would work on SportsCenter. Like,
oh, yeah, no, for sure.
On this day, blah.
Yeah, when that happened, I definitely had the exact same response, which is like, oh, well, that would have been really nice, but you know what? Screw it. They suck. I hate them. That's good. But damn it, that could have been us. Like sort of these conflicting emotions where it would have been nice to bookend it. But honestly, if he throws as many interceptions as possible, I don't really mind.
Yeah, as long as Aaron Rodgers comes down with a bad case of the Cutler, we're fine. Like I would be okay with that.
For sure.
Yeah. So the other thing I had to ask about the Green Bay Packers is people seem to be able to run on them fairly easily. It's something that if I were a Packers fan, I'd be a little bit concerned about. The Rams certainly did, and they have a really good running back. Will Adrian Peterson be able to get past that sort of thing, and get past the sort of the half shoddy run defense they have?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy because when you take a look at Green Bay's defense overall, like I said, it's performing pretty well. If you take a look at the splits in that Green Bay defense, like DVOA, for example, Football Outsiders is a DVOA metric, which I think is touted as a little bit more precise than it really is, but it's very good at giving you ballparks, and it's one of the only ones that adjusts for defense. So the Football Outsiders DVOA metric, Green Bay is ranked number 1 against the pass. Honestly, that's the best pass defense in the league is probably Denver, but Green Bay is up there, right? They're clearly in the top 5 against the pass. Arizona might be up there. The Jets might be up there, as weird as that is. Even Carolina, who have had a lot of problems, they might be up there, right? We're clearly top 5 against the pass. But, like you said, against the run, for for a defense that's ranked so highly in this metric, like overall they're 4th, right? For a defense that's ranked so highly in this metric, they're really bad, and they're ranked 31st against the rush, and that's adjusting for your opponent. Now, it doesn't really do a good job of adjusting for Todd Gurley because he hasn't played every game. This is I think his 2nd game, so it doesn't necessarily correct for that, and it will as time goes on. But I think the overall message of that is pretty obvious and pretty clear, which is that they have a really bad running defense. And I think, you're going to see more of it with Adrian Peterson, when they play, if, Green Bay can't fix this problem. And, the problem for Green Bay, a lot of that has to do with, what Clay Matthews' responsibilities are as an inside linebacker. They like to blitz him a lot because, duh, like obviously that's what you want to do. But, he's not as good against the run as an inside linebacker as a lot of people seem to indicate. He misses tackles and he takes some weird angles, and it's, maybe it's an adjustment thing, which is not to say he's as bad as I thought he would be. I mean, he's definitely better than I thought he'd be. But they just don't have inside linebackers. In fact, I don't even know who's playing next to him right now because, like, the two people that were playing next to him got injured in succession, or the one person and then another person. So I have no idea what's happening to inside linebacker for them. They also have issues along the line. They're going to have LaTroy Guion come back. He was good for them, so maybe that's a good thing. I tend to think that it's probably a bad thing for them. Dayton Jones hasn't been playing well. So, yeah, they've got a lot of problems in their front seven in terms of defending the run, and I think that when you have a player like Adrian Peterson, or, in their next couple of games, they're going to have to deal with how the Panthers, construct their running attack with Jonathan Stewart, who hasn't been having a great year, but Cam Newton, who has been having a pretty good year despite all of the receiver problems, he can still run it too. I think that, Melvin Gordon's pretty bad, but Danny Woodhead's really good, so they can have some problems against the Chargers. Who knows what's going to happen with the Broncos? Because I don't really know how to deal with that running back situation. But they're going to have some issues.
With Hillman / CJ Anderson coming at you?
Yeah. I think that the Broncos will still struggle a little bit against the Packers despite the run defense issues, just because I think the Broncos' run offense is meh. But I think that's going to be a problem for them going forward as a defense overall. But I think that they'll be able to weather the storm for a little bit until they have to play some pretty established running offenses.
Yeah, I definitely think that if you're looking at the next couple of games for the Packers, you can look at the Chargers. That's probably going to end up being a win, especially because all they seem to really want to do is pass the ball, and they have no offensive line to hold. So they're probably going to beat up. Phillip Rivers pretty good. They have the bye, and then they have the Broncos on a Sunday night. So Manning's going to play out of his mind because it's a night game, but against a really good pass defense. So that's going to be really intriguing. I don't know who ends up winning that, but I feel like the Packers will probably end up with an edge on that. And then they have the Panthers, and that's kind of, if they're looking at a loss in these three games, I really think that the Panthers have the best chance of giving it to them.
That's interesting because I kind of flipped it around. I thought the Broncos were probably the best chance because I think that all-world defense can get to Rodgers, not easily, but pretty well. And then I think that unlike the Rams, their offense will be functional enough to get enough points to win the game. Whereas I think with the Panthers, there's a lot of questions at that offense. You got the offensive line, you've got all of those receivers. I mean, Ted Ginn is like either their best or second best receiver right now, excluding tight end Greg Olsen, who didn't even have a very good game last week. I'm just worried. I think that their defense isn't as good as the Broncos' defense, and I think that their offense isn't enough to make up for that deficit. So I think the Broncos are more likely to win that game. But I think that you're right overall that between the Broncos and the Panthers, there's probably a loss between the two of them.
A loss is looming. Yeah, a loss is probably looming somewhere in between the two. So yeah, that'll be so that's Green Bay. We can answer the question. Yes, they are in fact good, both for their record and the personnel, and they're not dropping like flies anymore. Like during the preseason, especially, they were dropping like flies thanks to the serial killers that are employed by the Packers as their medical staff. Like we haven't run into a lot of horrible injuries out of them yet, other than Jordy Nelson. So I think that the injuries played themselves out early, and we haven't seen a string of them again yet. Like I said, they've had all those inside linebacker injuries. It might be coming. Like we might just be building toward a week 7. Oh God, everyone has been carted off the field. Like that's just when they decided to strike.
I think that's just so much more likely than the Packers are finally a healthy team. I don't imagine a world where that's true.
They finally hired a staff for taking care of the people that isn't trained murderers and aren't a bunch of interns from Scrubs. Like is that what's happening? They finally have competent people working on the guys.
That just seems so unlikely. I bet James Jones is probably going to get injured. I bet Josh Sitton's going to get a hamstring pull, and I bet that like Jake Ryan has an Achilles problem, and now they're just screwed again.
And then Lacey has turf toe that lasts the entire rest of the year.
The entire season, yeah.
Yeah, He actually lost his toe into the turf. It's terrible.
It's just awful. But it did solve the webbed toe problem he had.
God, I forgot about that. I've been reminded of two really weird things today as far as football is concerned. I've been reminded of that, and I was reminded that a year ago, like a week ago, Tom Cable buried a football in Oakland. Like I had totally forgotten about that, and somebody had put the link up, like, oh, by the way, a year and a week ago, Tom Cable buried a football to symbolize the first quarter of the season was over, and you never have to worry about those games again because they were all losses. Like, oh God, I forgot about head coach. I forgot about head coach Tom Cable out in Oakland burying footballs.
Actually, I just looked that up. That was Tony Sperano.
Oh, Sperano. That's right. Yeah. It was Tony Sperano. It wasn't Tom Cable.
Yeah, I always confused him because he was in Miami, right? And he had a tight end, Anthony Fasano, and that just messed with me, Fasano and Sperano. But yeah, Tom Cable hasn't coached in Oakland for a little bit. He's busy ruining the Seahawks offensive line.
Yes. Good for him. He's doing the Lord's work out there. I really feel like if we can give him a medal for what he's doing out there to keep Russell Wilson contained, I just want to say you're doing a hell of a job there. Good job, Cable.
Hell of a job, Tommy.
Yes, hell of a job, Tommy. Thank you. So there's one more team in the division, and they are rested up from their bye week and ready to take on a damaged and demoralized Chiefs team. Wow, is this team depressed? I was messing around on their on the Chiefs subreddit. I just wanted to take the temperature of the team and see where they were at. I haven't seen despair like that since AP went out with his quad. Like, this is a fan base that is just ready to jump off. Like, they need to be talked off the ledge is what they need. Like, all of a sudden their defense isn't very good. They have no real run game. Although, let's be fair, their quarterback has recently discovered that he can throw touchdowns to wide receivers. So he's learning. But, man.
It can learn. It can
learn. This human sent a pad of absolute garbage. Yeah, so the Chiefs are coming to town. We'll actually be doing a full preview of that on the next show, which should be airing on Thursday morning before the game. But before we talk about that, let's go over the wins and losses for the Vikings. We won against the Chargers. We won against the Lions, both of which in very convincing fashion, both of which at home. Mm-hmm. The losses were to the 49ers and the Broncos. Let's toss the 49ers right out. That doesn't ever need to be discussed. So. Not necessarily because it was a terrible game, but because it was. But everything about that conspired against the Vikings, and we can just agree that a game that Chris Berman is commentating is not worth talking about.
I think that it is definitely atypical and doesn't represent sort of who the Vikings are and what kind of team they are.
Yeah. So we can look at the Chargers and Lions victories. Okay, we beat teams that we probably should have, and we lost a game to the Broncos that we probably should have. 49ers aside, a little weird. What can we take away from the first quarter of the year? Can we answer the question of, are we good?
I think that this is definitely a team that you can't really answer that question yet, but I think the most optimistic game, or the game that you can draw the most optimism from, isn't either of the wins. I think it's the Broncos game, because they were able to go toe-to-toe with one of the best teams in the league, who are one of the best teams in the league for a completely different reason than they were sort of a year ago, but sure, fine. One of the best teams in the league, and it had to come down to sort of the last-second field goal, and the game is a lot different, if the kicker makes a kick. Right, which is not to say, this team is better than that because it still has the same kicker. But it is definitely an indication that the team overall is very competitive even with the best team. So I think that it is likely that this is a good team. Obviously, good teams win, right? I think that the idea that close games are a good indication of whether or not a team is good or not, I think that that's way overrated, and teams don't show a consistent ability to consistently win close games. You're good because either you make games not close by winning, or you get into close game situations more often with good teams. And I think that overall, getting into a close game with the Broncos, I think that's a good sign. I think that, destroying the Chargers, doing a very good job against the Lions, that's also a great sign. I think that it's more likely than not this team's a good team, but I think that, I think that this is definitely an instance where a couple more games is probably going to be a better judge of what kind of team the Vikings are, especially because you do kind of have to throw out that game against the 49ers, but it is an indication that the team can be very inconsistent. And I think some of that has to do with youth. I think some of that has to do with kind of the higher risk playing style of the defense. Some of that has to do, with the awful offensive line. So, we'll see. They can be inconsistent but good, which is going to cause some problems in a one and done situation like the playoffs. But they can be fun to watch at least.
That's all we're really going for, is fun to watch. So let's talk about the offensive line. Let's talk about the play at center. And is there a timetable for John Sullivan, who we haven't mentioned on the show for a while? Is there a timetable for his return yet?
Yeah, John Sullivan's going to be kind of interesting to figure out if he's going to come back, sooner rather than later. I think that he's not eligible to play until November 8th. I think that he's probably going to return on November 8th. So that's when that's against the Rams. So I think that that's going to be interesting to look at. Josh Robinson will be eligible, by the way, October 25th. But I don't think he'll necessarily be ready by then, but pretty close to then. So I think that we can expect John Sullivan's return then. That's going to be something to look forward to, and that's going to solve but not completely get rid of. It's going to paper over some of these other problems that the offensive line has had, including sort of, protection assignments. I think they've also had problems running the ball, especially up the middle, and making sure that they can anticipate sort of where blockers are going to be and stuff like that. So I think that he's going to help in a big way setting up the offensive line for success. And it'll be interesting to see how the offensive line changes when John Sullivan comes back. But I think that he will come back when he's first eligible to, which is for the November 8th game.
That would, and not that John Sullivan ends up being the greatest thing that ever lived and automatically fixes our problems on the line, but having somebody who is that experienced at center certainly can't hurt. Center, I've said it before on the show repeatedly that center is one of the least thought about players on the team, but is certainly one of the most important players on the team. Not only for snap counts and everything, but for blocking and just knowing what's coming. Like if you have a bad center, the rest of the offensive line and especially the quarterback feel it. But if you have somebody with a lot of experience and is obviously your first string center, then things can go a lot easier for you. And that's the hope anyway, is that when John Sullivan returns, that it eases up just a little bit of the pressure. Maybe it gives Teddy like a quarter second more to look at his options.
For sure, and I think that it allows Bridgewater to take better advantage of like blitz looks, right? Because if you have the ability to identify who's going to rush or have a good ability to determine what the assignments are based on who rushes, then you have the ability to give your quarterback enough time to throw to the hot read. I mean, because we saw Teddy get hit during the drop back. I mean, that's just not acceptable. An offense can't run, right? So I think that if you give him that extra half second, which, in football, that's pretty huge because you only have 2.5 seconds to throw the ball in most situations, then, yeah, I think that that's going to be hugely advantageous for the offense. It's not necessarily because Sullivan will block better. I mean, he is better at blocking than Berger, but not by a ton. It's because he knows everything he needs to know at center. He can set the protection adjustments. He can set the blocking assignments, etc. I mean, we talked before on the show about, one of my guys, Tom Farniok, who has since, I believe, been even cut for the practice squad for the Vikings, which is too bad. But he was when he was playing center for Iowa State, he was doing like half of the offensive coordinator's job, which, I talked to him about it. It is a little unusual how much, in-depth, how much of an in-depth role he had with the team, but it is basically an extension of a center's responsibilities. They have a lot of control over the offense. It goes offensive coordinator, quarterback, center. So I think that having Sullivan back is going to be a huge boon to the Vikings. And I'm not going to say it's going to solve all the problems, obviously. I'm still worried about TJ Clemmings. And I'm still a little bit worried about the way Fusco's playing. I think that when Sullivan comes back, maybe Fusco plays a little bit better because maybe it's an assignment confusion thing. I don't know, but it's going to improve things.
Again, that's the hope and fervent prayer. Other thing I want to mention is Bridgewater. We talked about it last week about how there's a little bit of mistrust about how he's playing so far and some concern. Is any of that warranted? And looking at the next 4 games, does he have an opportunity to prove himself with his arm?
I think so. Well, I think that he has an opportunity to prove himself with the arm. I think there is some warrant to it, but I think that for the most part, it's overblown. And I think it's interesting because when you take a look at like a metric that's designed to mostly cover what happens on the results of plays, like let's say quarterback DVOA. Teddy Bridgewater, he doesn't rank super high because the results of the individual plays, they're not good. I mean, I think he ranks 29th in DVOA. That's pretty bad. But when you take a look at, something that grades players, let's take a look at like Pro Football Focus is probably the best / only example. And they've taken a lot of beatings, this last, couple of weeks based on, how they ranked Aaron Rodgers, how they ranked Blake Bortles, how they ranked Andy Dalton in some pretty statistically powerful games for them. Which, by the way, I mean, Aaron Rodgers is like their 3rd-ranked quarterback, so it's not like they hate Rodgers. Teddy Bridgewater's 12th, right? I think the truth is closer to that than it is to the DVOA measure ranking him 29th because, he's overcoming this offensive line problem in big ways. In some games, the first half is really bad. The second half is great. And then that was the game against the Broncos, where the first half was just awful. And I think that Bridgewater didn't do very well in the second half. He did fantastically. And that was without his top receiver, there, theoretical top receiver, there to play the game. And, I think that given the situations that he's in, I think that if you grade based off of, what he can do and what his options are, yeah, no, for sure. I think that he's playing well. I think that he's not, necessarily a top 5 quarterback or a top 8 quarterback in the league, but I think he's certainly a top 15 quarterback based off of the way that he's playing and responding to the situations that he's put in. So yeah, I think I just wouldn't worry that much about his statistical output or his DVOA output because it's getting marred by these problems at receiver, not as much receiver, but still there are some problems at receiver and with the offensive line, which I mean, it's one of the worst years I've seen in the NFL for offensive line play. This is a bad offensive line. It's not even the worst offensive line in the NFL. I mean, I would say, Seattle's is worse, Miami's is worse, San Diego's is worse.
San Diego has like JV squad players playing on it.
Almost literally.
Yeah, they have they have like what, anyone from their actual like from their starters left? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, no, but it's just awful. But that's not to say that the Vikings don't have massive problems with their offensive line. I think in many years, like 2007, 2008, 2009, if you got this level of offensive line play, you could pretty confidently say it was the worst in the league. But the offensive line play in the league is so bad this year that it's like, okay, well, he doesn't have the worst offensive line in the NFL, but that's not really relevant to evaluating his performance, against players that are clearly playing with a good offensive line. I mean, you take a look at Andy Dalton, you take a look at Aaron Rodgers, they're playing with a pretty good offensive line. Tom Brady is playing with a really unique offensive line setup. I think, they have a rotation of basically, 8 offensive linemen or 7 offensive linemen that are put in for different situations. It's basically West Virginia's quick guard, strong guard system, plus another wrinkle. That's really interesting. Matt Ryan, shockingly, I mean, last year you wouldn't have expected to say this at all. Matt Ryan is playing with a really good offensive line. And they tend to be the quarterbacks that are putting out, these incredible statistics. So yeah, I think that if you gave Teddy an average offensive line, his statistical output would be somewhere near the top 10 on a per pass basis. And I think that that's kind of the thing that a lot of people aren't adjusting for. And I'm not saying that in some of these games where he struggled, that he didn't struggle even after you take into account pressure, because he did. But in some of these games, he exceeded what you'd expect an average quarterback to be able to do, given the situations that he's in, given who is open, and given what pressure he had. So, yeah, I wouldn't worry about him too much.
Yeah, Bridgewater's basically looking at this like he's looking at a car on the side of the road. Like, it's not it's dead. It's dead. It's not moving. As opposed to some of the other bad lines in the league, like, oh, well, this one's on fire. I can't get anywhere either way, but at least my car's not on fire.
No, for sure.
I'm not at that point yet.
Yeah, and I just took a look at it. So Teddy Bridgewater is under pressure for 42% of his snaps this year. So that's cool. That's ranked 5th in the league. But if you take a look at like another year, let's say 2008, 42% would have ranked number 1 in the league by a huge margin, because number 1 that year was 34.6%. So that's what I mean. The offensive line play is so bad this year that something that would have ranked number 1 in 2008 is now number 5. In 2009, Josh Freeman, 36.6%, the most in the league in 2009. So yeah, I think I think that you have to. It's not until 2010 until you get to somebody who has more, and that's Jay Cutler, 42.5%. So most years, Teddy's offensive line would be the worst in the NFL. It just so happens that we're in a really bad year for offensive line. So, which also means we're actually in a pretty bad year for quarterback play, unsurprisingly. So yeah, the car's not on fire, but the engine still doesn't work.
Yeah. I think that's pretty good analogy for it. So we're looking at the next 4 games, and we're looking at the Chiefs, at the Lions, at the Bears, and the Rams at the Rams at TCF Bank. Of the 3, this hope of the 4, this should be a pretty winnable stretch with a combined record of the 4 teams of 7-18. But if I'm fearing one game out of this, I'm fearing the Bears game. And I'll tell you why. It's not necessarily that Chicago is going to just womp on us and just become the Bears of old. We really have a problem winning in Chicago. That is something we do not do very often. I can just foresee the Bears having their way with us.
No, for sure. I think that could be a problem. I think that in this case, you don't have to deal with the special teams headaches anymore, which is nice.
No, I think for this one game, they're gonna trade back and get Devin Hester to return a kick for him, and they're gonna sign him to like a day contract, and then he's gonna retire. Like that's what's gonna end up happening. That'll be the twist. John Fox will be like, no, this is gonna be brilliant. You guys have no idea. Why did the Bears trade away Matt Forte for Devin Hester? the one game against the Vikings. Asses.
Well, if you believe in that kind of voodoo, which you do, that's a problem. I mean, you're taking a look at all the games at Chicago the past couple of years. 2014 lost 13-21, despite Chicago being awful that year. So 2013 lost 30-31. That was pretty gut-wrenching because that happened at the last second. I remember that. 2012 lost 10-28. 2011 lost 10-39. 2010 lost 13-27. Not that anyone was surprised that the 2010 team lost. 2009, our best team in a long time, lost 30-36.
Yeah, that was just a brutal game too.
Yeah, no, that was tough. So yeah, it wasn't until 2008's a loss, 2007 is a win. So it's not until as far back as 2007, that stellar team, that the Vikings had a loss in Chicago.
Who was the quarterback of that team? I'm just curious. I honestly can't remember who was the quarterback of that team. Was that Brad Johnson or was that somebody that was?
No, that was Tavares Jackson.
That was T-Jack.
He went 9 for 23 and 136 yards.
Say what you will, but that man does have a Super Bowl ring, and he did complete a pass in a Super Bowl.
He did complete a pass in a Super Bowl, but the reason they won that game is because they ran the ball 43 times.
Yeah.
So yeah, Chester Taylor 22 times, Adrian Peterson 20 times, 3 touchdowns, 224 yards. Not even his best performance that year.
No. But
But yeah,
we have a history of problems in Chicago. I don't know if it's the food or what, but we just have a problem with them.
It's honestly, it's probably the turf. But I think it's winnable. I think it's obviously winnable. I think it's a win. I'm worried about the Rams because they're weird and they win games they shouldn't win and they lose games that they shouldn't lose, and they're a weird team to deal with. So I don't ever know what to do with the Rams. I mean, they did this last year. They're doing that this year. They did it the year before. I don't really know what to do with the Rams. So that's a team that I just don't know. I think it's a win, but you never know. The Chiefs I was worried about. No, not so much. Not just because they lost Jamal Charles, although that's the majority of the reason. I think Sharkandrick West is talented, but obviously Jamal Charles is it's probably the best back in the league, unless you want it to be Le'Veon Bell, in which case I won't really argue. But yeah, you lose Jamal Charles, you have Sharkandrick West. I think that's going to hurt you. But I think that also the Chiefs just don't show the ability to adapt, and I think that they've had a lot of problems. I think the Chicago game is good evidence of that. So I would have counted that as a potential loss. Now I think it's the Vikings are in a position where they should win it. I wouldn't be surprised if the Vikings came out of these next 4 games 3-1. You hope 4-0 because the Vikings certainly have the talent and they certainly have the coaching to be 4-0 and to beat all of these teams. But I wouldn't be surprised to see a surprise loss. Maybe it is the Bears because fuck the Bears. Maybe it's them. But that's a game they should expect to win.
Yeah, that is definitely the hope as far as the next 4 games for the Vikings are concerned. What else should we be looking for, sort of moving forward as far as the Vikings? Because we're at the quarter mark for the year, and is there anyone you want to say has played particularly better than you would have expected over the first 4 weeks, or is there someone who really should be stepping up now that we've made it through the quarter mark?
I think Matt Cluel and Mike Harris are the first names that come to mind. I think Mike Wallace has played better than I thought too. So that's all obviously very good news. Stephon Diggs, the game that he was in, he obviously played pretty fantastically. You do have to worry about those 2 fumbles. You can't just ignore them happening. But hooray, Stephon Diggs.
What are you saying? I've completely forgotten about all the AP fumbles in the game. Like that never happened.
So yeah, and then Adrian Peterson, he's been up and down, which is kind of who he is. So on defense, I think in terms of playing better than I thought they would. I don't know, man. I expected Harrison to play like the best safety in the league, and that's exactly what he's doing. Xavier Rhodes is not playing as well as he did at the end of last season, but he's still playing very well, so I can't even say that. Terrence Newman, I guess, is playing better than I thought. Brian Robinson's playing better than I thought. Players that are playing worse than I thought, I would say Brandon Fusco, I would say Everson Griffin, but that's mostly a penalty thing. Non-penalty, he's playing pretty well. Eric Kendricks, I thought he would play better. Honestly, he's playing well, but I thought he would play better. But I was just so high on him that maybe I was just blinded by that. Anthony Barr, I thought he would play very well. He's playing even better than that, which is really nice to see. But, I thought, I would think that, Andrew Sendejo would have played better, and I didn't have super high expectations. TJ Clemmings is playing how I thought he would. Teddy Bridgewater's not playing as well as I thought he would. So those are the people I take a look at. Clemmings, you want to improve. Bridgewater, you want to improve. And then on defense, figuring out that other safety spot, you want that to improve. Because I think that if that safety spot gets cleaned up, even trading away a starting middle linebacker or whatever, is not going to be that much of a problem, because I think that defense starts to really tighten up once you get those final couple of pieces, upgraded and improved.
Oh, and I can agree with just about all of that. There has been some really stellar play out there. And it's been nice. Although I think as far as the disappointment for me, I would end up having to look at Kyle Rudolph. Like I really don't.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I feel like Rudolph is the one name that we didn't mention there that has just not necessarily played up to the expectations that we would have had for him.
Yeah, and I think the expectations are created both by the fact that he was probably playing pretty well before his injury last year. He has this really nice contract, these are expectations that are reasonable to have of him, and he's not playing up to them. And it's not that I'm asking him to be Gronkowski or even, Kelsey. I'm asking him to be like at least Delaney Walker, basically. Like I want him to get open on a semi-regular basis and to move the chains, and want him to win contested catches, which maybe Delaney Walker's a bad example because he doesn't really do that. But I want him to win, in areas where he won his rookie year, and also the middle of the field. I just feel like as a red zone threat, he's not performing there. And it's not just because Teddy's not throwing to him. It's because when he does get the ball, he's not securing it as well as he should. He's not winning, 50-50 balls, and he's not getting as open as often as he should. I mean, you take a look at, just the all-22 in general. I thought he had a real bad game against Denver getting open. TJ Ward had a fantastic game, 2.5 sacks, something like that. But also he sealed Kyle Rudolph up. So, you want him to get open more against a strong safety like Ward. So yeah, I think you're right. He's been disappointing, and he should be playing better based off of the talent level that he's shown in the past and based off of his contract.
And the blocking that he's shown hasn't been very good either.
That's certainly been an issue. That's been a much bigger issue in the run game. I think there's been a lot of instances where he's just lost the run block, or he hasn't sustained it long enough, or he can't finish. In the passing game, which is, I hate tight ends in pass protection. For the Vikings, I'll allow it because of TJ Clemmings. In the passing game, he's shockingly pretty good, but as you can imagine, he doesn't get a lot of pass blocking snaps because why? It's just so unusual to see tight ends in pass protection as often as they are for Minnesota, and when they are, it's often Rhett Ellison and not Kyle Rudolph, who, by the way, also a little bit disappointing this year. But Kyle Rudolph, his run blocking is definitely at issue, and I think that you're right that it's caused some of these negative plays.
Yeah. So that's going to be it for this iteration of Norse Code. Thank you for listening. We are going to have a full-on discussion of the Chiefs game, or the lead up to the Chiefs game. Next episode, which should come out on Thursday. We'll talk all about the injuries the Chiefs have sustained, what the Vikings should be doing to maximize results against that, and how we are going to run up the score 86-0. Right.
Definitely.
I feel like that is going to be the second highest scoring game of the week, second only to the Patriots going into Indianapolis.
That's going to be so funny, especially because it's like kind of a revenge game too.
Oh, it's gotta be a revenge game. Like Brady's going for records. Like you can't just walk in there and not go for records. Like that defense is already picked apart enough. Like the Colts aren't good this year. Let's be clear. The Colts are not good this year. And that is going to be just such a beautiful bloodbath to watch. And I want every time that Brady throws a touchdown, I want him to point up to that banner that they hung that I think is their participation medal for making it to the AFC Championship last year. Like, I'm not taking Brady's side on the whole Ball Ghazi thing or anything, but I just want him to point each time he throws a touchdown to that banner and just laugh maniacally.
That's just such an incredible... I can't believe the Colts hug it up. Yeah, I can't wait for this game. This game's going to be so fun. Yeah. By the way, even though Patriots are expensive in DFS, just throwing that out there, they're pretty good plays this week in DFS.
Yeah, that would definitely be something that you should potentially look into. And also, just a quick note: the DFS segment is moving to the Dusty portion of it. Dusty is going to be working with Arif on the Thursday show, talking about the DFS, potential plays and steals. So look out for that. If you stick around after the credits, we will have our Norse Code League recap, where I will be discussing how I have lost again and how I am currently winless. I'm not terrible at fantasy, but this league, this team is just falling apart very, very quickly. I'm about to have a fire sale.
But some of it's not your fault. Some of it is like a kicker thing. But I mean, let's talk about the fact that like the last undefeated team went down. That's just so tragic, I think.
I feel like I could care, but I won't.
It's just so sad that there was this chance for perfection and how pristine this team could have been. And it's just sad whenever you see, something so perfect just spoiled by having a 1 after the win column.
It is too bad that your team lost, isn't it?
Was it my team? I just got the update. That's wow. That's pretty upsetting to hear.
Yeah, that is too damn bad is what that is. All right, so if you'd like to follow us on Twitter, you can do so at Norse Code DN. You can follow Arif at Arif Hassan NFL. You can follow myself at Big Mono, although I do most of my tweeting over at the Norse Code DN Twitter account. And you can follow our co-host Dusty, who will be returning and having his big return show later this week on Thursday morning's show. So take a listen to that, and you can follow him at Dusty O'Connell. Do you think I'm going to host the next show? I think I'm going to host the next show. Nothing but love for you, Dusty. So for Arif, I am James. Once again, thank you for listening. And our formula is forever this: keep Teddy alive. We will see you on Thursday morning.
Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.
Well, if you've stuck around this long, you are most likely waiting to hear about the Norse Code Podcast Fantasy Football League. There's 2 big stories coming out of this week. First off, I am still terrible and winless. I am winless going into week 6. The Ghost of Al Davis lost a horrendous game against Can You Dig It, 64 to 110. Now, you may ask, how is that even possible? Well, let me tell you about Percy Harvin. Let me tell you about Moncrief from Indianapolis. Let me tell you about Eddie Lacy. Let me tell you about Hill from New Orleans. Let me tell you about Green Beckham from Tennessee. And let me tell you about the Houston defense playing against the corpse of Matt Hasselbeck. And that is how you get to 64 points. The saving grace I had was Doug Martin, who, in defiance of God's will, somehow ended up with 3 touchdowns. So good for him. But that sums up my terrible fantasy football experience at Yahoo for this week. But the other big story to come out of the week is that Arif lost quite handedly. Arif was knocked off by Manuel. He was knocked off 130 to 116. The team that Manuel brought up was brought up by Manning, was brought up by Beckham Jr., Hopkins, and Julian Edelman and DeMarco Murray. That's a good combination. Arif just didn't have an answer. He had Phillip Rivers, and he had Carlos Hyde and Bell and Antonio Gates, and nothing else was working for him. So Arif has been knocked off. He remains in first place, but he's not going to have an undefeated season. And let me tell you what, I am so thankful that we don't have to hear about that, because that was going to end up on the show at some point, and you don't want to hear that, and I don't want to hear that, because Arif gloating is about the worst thing you could possibly imagine. So we get to move on. Other games this week, Carlos's crazy team loses to the $1 Million Shack. The Shack wins 114 to 81. The Shack had starting Devontae Freeman, and also had Hearns from Jacksonville, along with Snead from New Orleans. Meanwhile, Carlos's crazy team started Tony Romo, because, of course, Kyle hasn't changed any of his players. He also started Eric Decker. I'm bothered by the fact that I'm starting people who are, starting. Meanwhile, Kyle has people who have been on IR for the first 4 weeks and he's done better than me. He has a win. Thanks, Kyle. Thank you. Next up, we can take a look at Dusty, who gutted out a victory. So even Dusty has a win over me, or has a win against Blount Force Trauma, knocking Blount Force Trauma to 3-2. Dusty at 1-4. Dusty won 88.96 to Blount Force Trauma's 76.54. Blount Force Trauma started Aaron Rodgers. That was not the best option, seeing as how he threw 2 picks at home, which shouldn't be an issue normally. Blount Force Trauma also had Clay from Buffalo at tight end, who only scored 0.7 points. Meanwhile, Dusty broke out Tyrod Taylor and Justin Forsett and did not start a tight end, and meanwhile still won the game. That shows grit, determination, and a little bit of BS, personally. Minnesota Midgets lose to Matt Frazier's team, 81-136. How does that happen, you ask? Well, Matt Frazier ended up starting Tom Brady and Eifert and the Green Bay defense, who, let's remember, got a pick 6 and 3 other interceptions on top of that. So, that's pretty good. They also played against a team quarterbacked by Peyton Manning. Minnesota Midgets started Peyton Manning along with Jimmy Graham and Todd Gurley. Didn't really get as many points as he would have hoped. He is now in 6th place. Meanwhile, Matt Frazier's team is at 4-1 in 2nd place. Next on the list, probably Sean Prater defeated TBA 80 points to 78. This was the closest game of the week. And when you look at the players, you can understand why. Matt Stafford was played by our loser, TBA, along with Calvin Johnson, Emmanuel Sanders, and Ronnie Hillman. Their biggest point getter was their defense with Denver at 22 points. Meanwhile, probably Sean Prater, who started Arizona's defense, which was no slouch this week, had Crowell at running back for 14.7 points, along with Alex Smith, who didn't do well, but didn't do poorly. Probably Sean Prater guts it out 80.14 to 78.62. So let's look at the standings. We have Arif's team, Jeffrey and Hyde, in 1st place. We have Matt Frazier's team in 2nd, Ooh Yes, who knocked off Arif in 3rd. Probably Sean Prater in 4th, Blount Force Trauma in 5th, the Minnesota Midgets in 6th, the $1 Million Shack in 7th, Can You Dig It in 8th, TBA 9th, Carlos's Crazy Team somehow has a victory in 10th, Balgazi Green Ellis is 11th, and the Ghost of Al Davis is still dead in the ground in last place. I can't wait to pick up that first pick overall next year. I'm just waiting for it at this point. Good for me. Thank you for listening to this week's show. Again, if you'd like to donate, you can at NorseCodePodcast.com. You can go down to the very bottom of the page and click the donate button. That will get it to us. You can also donate to our Patreon page, which is at the Daily Norseman. The link for it is at the Daily Norseman page for our show notes. Thanks for listening, and have a good rest of your week.